Howdy everyone, and welcome. Today we're proud to introduce to you yFiles for Avalonia. That is to say the yFiles SDK you already know and love, but now for Avalonia, which should allow you to create cross-platform network visualization apps with ease. I should stress that while this talk is being pre-recorded, we are taking questions, so if something's unclear or you need more information, just fire away in the comments because either myself or one of my lovely colleagues will be there to help you ASAP. Before starting, very briefly, my name's Henry. I'm a still fresh-faced engineer here at yWorks in Tübingen, and while I wasn't involved in the development of yFiles for Avalonia, I am very proud to be the one presenting it to you today. More importantly though, what can you actually expect from today's presentation? I think you can expect 4 key things. First, for those of you familiar with Avalonia but not yFiles, I hope to give you an overview of what yFiles actually is so that you can appreciate how powerful it is when it comes to network visualization. For those of you familiar with yFiles but not Avalonia, I hope to give you a brief overview of what it is, so that then I can introduce to you yFiles for Avalonia. Finally, we're going to wrap things up with a code demo in which I hope to show you the speed and expedience and ease with which you can create interactive, styled, and importantly, useful network visualization apps using yFiles for Avalonia. In order to deliver on these 4 promises, I've structured the presentation as follows. First, we're going to talk about the key problem we're trying to solve, or maybe more specifically, the 3 problems we're trying to solve. With those in mind, I then hope to introduce yFiles to you, then Avalonia, then yFiles for Avalonia, and then we're going to jump into a bit of code so that you can then appreciate how useful this is and what the problems are we're trying to actually solve. Right. With all that preamble out of the way, I think we can now talk about the 3 key challenges that we're trying to address here. First and foremost, as anyone working with modern enterprise data probably already knows, we're very rarely confronted with just data tables consisting of rows and columns. But instead, we're dealing with relations between entities, graph data. And making sense of graph data isn't easy because we often need some kind of visualization of it to really understand what's going on. But turning, let's say, this JSON into some kind of useful network visualization is itself non-trivial. And this is where yFiles comes in, because yFiles is a modern SDK available to web, Java, and WPF developers, as well as now Avalonia developers, that allows you to create powerful network visualizations with ease. But assuming that you've, let's say, developed such a network visualization, say with yFiles, you might be interested in deploying it across multiple platforms, the web, various desktops, macOS, Windows, Linux, maybe even mobile, iOS and Android. But developing cross-platform isn't easy. It involves a lot of code, multiple versions of code, and this can make maintenance difficult. And this is where Avalonia comes in, because Avalonia is a framework developed for .NET that allows you to create various UIs across all these platforms with ease. But more on that later as well. Cool. Now that we know what the challenges are that we're trying to tackle, I think we can talk about what yFiles is in a little bit more detail. Put very simply, yFiles is a powerful SDK available to Java, web, and WPF developers, as well as now Avalonia developers, that allows you to turn your graph data into powerful, beautiful, and interactive network visualizations. Now there are many reasons why I think yFiles is cool. Too many to get into in this little presentation, but I think there are 5 key reasons why I think you should be excited about yFiles. First, if you've ever worked with graph data, you know that we need so-called layout algorithms to assign coordinates in 1D, 2D, 2.5D, 3D, or higher dimensional space to our nodes and edges. And yFiles gives you access to a whole host of these layout algorithms, be it organic layout algorithms, circular radial ones, hierarchical ones, or anything in between. But just because you've calculated positions in, let's say, 2D space, that doesn't mean that you've actually visualized anything yet. And here, yFiles gives you the tools necessary to produce high-quality renderings of your nodes and edges. And not just that, but we give you the tools necessary to customize and style them flexibly as you see fit for your users, the data, or the use case you have in mind. And you can do this as a function of, let's say, the data itself. You can specify these styles a priori, or you could interactively change them if that's what you need. Now, as we've hinted at sort of throughout this presentation, these visualizations need not be static necessarily. They can be interactive, they can be animated, and you can interact with these visualizations through mouse and keyboard, yes, but also through touch gestures if that's what you need. And then finally, all of these advantages would be purely academic if you couldn't get your data into yFiles in the first place, right? And so here we support a whole host of data formats. And not just that, But we are independent of specific data sources or cloud providers, which means, well, two things. First, it means that yFiles can update your visualizations in real time to changes in the data. And two, it means that data ownership always lies with you. Right. Now that we know what yFiles is, we can talk about Avalonia. Now, this is by no means going to be an exhaustive discussion of Avalonia, but by the end of this little section, I hope that you have a rough idea of what Avalonia is and why it's so powerful. Now, put very simply, it's a UI framework, which means that you can use it to build buttons and navigation bars and just general interfaces. It's inspired by WPF and UWP, which is cool because if you're familiar with either of those, you should get along with Avalonia quite swimmingly. But unlike those two, it's cross-platform despite being part of the .NET framework, which means that regardless of whether you're developing for mobile, say iOS or Android, desktop, be it Linux, macOS, Windows, or the web, you can do so with a single Avalonia codebase. Now, similar to WPF, it's C# and XAML based, and this is quite powerful because C# can be used to write the logic of your app, and XAML can be used to lay out and style the UI elements themselves. And the reason this is cool in turn is that C# has great third-party and tooling support, and XAML offers incredible flexibility in terms of how you lay out and style those UI elements. Unlike WPF, though, you're not reasoning about platform-specific UI elements. Instead, you have pixel-level control over the canvas that you're creating, which means that if you so desire, you can make sure that the UI you're creating will look identical regardless of the platform you're deploying for. And all of these features and all this power doesn't come at the cost of performance because Avalonia still guarantees native-level performance across platforms. Right. Now that we know what yFiles is, and we know what Avalonia is, we can talk about yFiles for Avalonia. And very simply, it's the complete yFiles SDK that you already know, but now built natively for Avalonia. This means it offers a streamlined API specifically for Avalonia users to ensure you can build network visualization apps with native-level performance across platforms with ease. This means that all those features that we talked about earlier and the ones we had to partially skip for time, the layout algorithms, the visualization tools, the flexible styling, the animations, the interaction, the data support, that's all there and more. Right. Let's start with the basic Avalonia template application and replace that text block that we see by default with our graph control. Now, at the moment, we don't see all that much, and that's because the graph itself is still empty. So, in order to change that, let's create, for now manually, a few nodes and edges. So, put very simply, we're going to manually create two nodes, named Node 1 and Node 2, and we're going to visualize both of them as basic rectangles for now. To differentiate Node 1 from Node 2, we're going to A, place them in slightly different places, and B, shape them slightly differently. But we're also going to add a label, manually for now, to Node 1 that simply says yFiles. And then finally, we're going to manually add an edge between nodes 1 and 2. Great. We can now see something, that's cool, but it's still a little bit bland looking. So let's add some styles to zhuzh things up a little. What is a style, you might ask? Put very simply, it's a set of aesthetic properties that you have control over that determines what the geometric primitives that make up your network visualization will look like. Now, constructing a graph like this every single time manually would be super tedious. But luckily, yFiles can easily import external data, such as the social network data that you see on screen right now. It consists of a list of nodes and a list of edges, and we simply have to tell yFiles how the JSON data maps to the graph. The first step is to actually load the data itself. Now, with the data loaded, we now need the so-called graph builder. The graph builder allows us to declaratively state how nodes and edges are created and from which properties in the JSON. In this particular case, I'm telling the graph builder to load its node sources from the graph data's node list portion, and specifically to grab its IDs from the ID field. Second, I'm going to instruct the graph builder to grab its edge data from the edge list and to grab its source and target IDs from the source and target fields. And finally, we have to actually build the graph to create the graph from the data itself, which we do using build graph. Well, this is a bit underwhelming now. Since our source data has no positional information, all nodes lie on top of one another, and the edges are subsequently not visible. Luckily, yFiles comes with a plethora of automatic layout algorithms that we can use to, well, lay out our graph data. Now, for this particular application, I think we should start with an organic layout because it's an easily understandable and very common choice. Now, this looks a bit squished. So let's adjust the preferred edge length to make sure there's a little bit more room, a little bit more air in the layout. Cool. But while the layout looks good, we don't really know what we're looking at yet, and that's because we've forgotten to add node labels. So let's quickly change that. Put very simply, we're going to use the graph builder again, and now instruct the graph builder where to pull the labels from. Let's also adjust the size so that the labels actually completely fit within the nodes themselves. Finally, to make reading the diagram easier, we can also add some data-based styling. More specifically, I'm going to change the color of nodes as a function of whether or not the node describes a man or a woman. Now, it would be cool if we could also edit the graph interactively, tweak the layout, resize and move our nodes, remove items, etc. And luckily, yFiles comes with comprehensive editing options built right in. To access them, we simply need to make use of the Graph Editor input mode. Now, as alluded to earlier, yFiles comes with a lot of different layout styles, and changing from one to the other is very easy. So if you aren't happy with an organic layout, say, perhaps a radial layout would be more to your liking. That's also not doing it for you? Well, maybe a hierarchical layout is more your speed. Now, this has been a fairly breakneck look at yFiles for Avalonia, but I hope that you can already appreciate how easy it is to create beautiful and, importantly, powerful network visualizations using it. Cool. Thanks for sticking around this long, but I think it's time we wrap up for today. Now, this has been a very breakneck look at yFiles, at Avalonia, and at yFiles for Avalonia. So if you want to know more about any of these three things, I recommend you check out yFiles.com, avaloniaui.net, or yfiles.com/Avalonia. And with that, I look forward to seeing your questions in the comments, and otherwise, I wish you happy diagramming.